You already know why. You have an opinion about why. You could already take that next step for them. As software engineers, our core responsibility is problem solving. And a lot of the time, people get that confused because they think that our core responsibility is just writing code. It just so happens that problem solving with solutions that involve code is primarily what we do. In this video, I wanted to drill into some limiting behaviors when it comes to problem solving. And I think that this is especially important as you become more senior as a software engineer because this can have a larger negative impact, and because your circle of influence is larger, this can affect more people. Before I dive into the topic, just a quick reminder to check that pinned comment for a link to my free weekly newsletter. Okay, so problem solving is the core of what we do as software engineers, and that's going to mean a bunch of different things. So for example, we're working with different stakeholders like our product owners, product managers, our engineering managers, and we're coming up with a strategy for building systems that solve problems, often technical problems where we have to write code. But this is one part of the problem solving process, the building and creation, kind of prioritizing and planning, but there's other sorts of things that come up in engineering organizations. Another flavor of things that come up is like live site issues. How are we handling bug reports, technical support, and that kind of thing that are coming in from customers, or we're using telemetry and noticing that some parts of our systems aren't looking so great. This is another type of problem solving and different vector that we have to approach. But another thing that comes up is just working and collaborating with partner teams. And that is, if they're doing the same type of stuff that I just mentioned, they're doing that on their own team as well. But that's going to mean that at some different cadence, they have to reach out to you to get some insight and understand things. And the limiting behavior that I want to be able to focus on in this video is when conversations are shut down. And that means that effectively someone is reaching out for help or trying to drive towards some type of end state, some goal that they have, and there's some type of communication that takes place that unfortunately answers a question, or sometimes not, but ultimately doesn't leave the person who's seeking some type of guidance with any further path to go forward. And I want to give you a few examples that are hypothetical just to illustrate what I'm talking about so you can see the impact of this. So for example, if someone reached out to me and they said, "Hey Nick, I watch your videos and I was thinking about building a system and I want to have a ASP.NET Core application with a MySQL database, and I'm thinking about taking some type of object structure from memory, and I want to put that into JSON and put that into columns in the SQL database." I could respond to that person and say, that's not how you use SQL. If I were to leave the conversation right there at that point, that person might not really know what to do, right? I'm telling them you're doing something wrong or that's not right. Regardless of how I phrase that, I could do it even more politely. But when you're abrupt like that and just ending the conversation, there's not a lot for that person to pull on. You're putting it all back on them to say, well, why, right? You already know why. You have an opinion about why. You could already take that next step for them. I'll give you another example from my work experience, and this is also going to be contrived, but related to the field that I'm in. I manage two deployment teams. And if I had a partner team reach out to us and they said, "Hey, look, we have a bug fix for this service that we have, and it's a really high priority. We've talked with some type of leadership. They've deemed it a high priority, and we'd like to be able to try and roll this out. And we're really hoping that we can have it out, across most of the machines by this time." If I just said, "No, that's impossible," and stopped there, this person would be left going, well, I have some type of expectation that I was working with other people on this, and I'm now asking for help and support on it. And it's fine if it might not be possible, even though that's what you want. But now this person is left with, well, what do I do now? And if they're coming to you as the expert, so if they're coming to me in this case and saying, this is what I would like from a deployment team, I need some help here. If I just end the conversation and I don't provide any further guidance, they're left wondering, well, what the heck am I supposed to do next? And it might seem obvious to you when I put these examples in front of you that you're thinking, well, it's probably easy to answer this person and just give them a little bit more guidance, right? Like, why is it that deployment can't do that? Or what's the alternative? If deployment can't do that, what can we do? In the first example, if I said, well, that's not what SQL databases are used for, maybe I could suggest, well, maybe you should try a document store. That might be a better fit. Or if you need the properties of a SQL database, Is there a reason why you're trying to put things into JSON? And if I just took more time to understand that person's scenario, maybe it's totally cool and acceptable that they're combining some type of data structure like that and putting it into SQL. The point is that when you have conversations like this in communication where you just end the conversation and don't provide any more breadcrumbs for someone to continue, it can make problem solving a lot more challenging. Ultimately, the goal, if you're working with other people, whether they're in your organization directly or not, same team or not, you're all working towards a common goal, or you should be at least, right? If you're working at the same company, you might have different priorities, but ultimately, you're there to try and help improve the lives of your customers. So it to me seems really weird that you would have limiting behaviors like this in some types of your conversations and different communication and not try to progress solving problems together. So now that I've explained what this problem is and why I think it has such a big impact, like I said, especially as you become more senior, you're exposed to more of this and likely you're in conversations where these different scenarios are bigger impact. What can we do about that? Especially if I'm saying this and you're realizing, hey, yeah, I kind of talk like that, right? I can understand if you're in situations where you're feeling maybe a little bit overwhelmed, you're feeling bothered by having lots of incoming questions like this. It's just not a good pattern to get into. So I wanted to be able to offer you some type of advice in hopes that you can try to make this a little bit better. And for folks that aren't yet in this position, just having some awareness about trying to improve this type of communication by the time you're in a position where you might experience it. The first thing that I feel like is the most obvious is explaining why you don't think something is feasible. I think offering context, even if you're not giving them the next breadcrumb about what to do, giving them the context about why something doesn't line up with what you think may in fact give them just enough of a breadcrumb to be able to ask you more questions, right? So in the first example about this JSON structure going to SQL, if I just said to them, no, that's not what SQL is used for, like I'm not really explaining myself, like what is it about SQL that doesn't really line up with that? I should be able to say, well, SQL is supposed to be designed to be a relational database and you probably have records with columns that map to that data. And an object store database is probably more suited for that, right? That's almost two parts, and that might give them enough information. Well, what do you mean object database? Like, what does that look like? But even the first part of that and just explaining why SQL is usually not suited for that might get them to ask questions, and you can provide more insight. In the second example, if I was talking about the deployment team that I have and people coming to us, I might be able to say, hey, look, deployment is not able to go that fast because it's unsafe based on the different standards that we have. If I could explain a little bit about our safe deployment practices, the person who's asking the questions might go, oh, I didn't realize that, and then start to ask other questions like, so how fast can we go? What is safe, right? They're not aware of these constraints and they're not sure that they can even ask those questions in the first place if they don't know about it. So part one is providing extra context. The next part, building on top of that, I think is a great option if you can go back to them and provide alternate solutions or at least a direction to go in, right? So going back to the first example, I mentioned document store databases. I might be able to say, hey, have you considered Mongo or something else? I think that a document store database might be better suited for that. It seems to be that these things are created for such a purpose, so maybe you might want to go check that out if you haven't already. In the second example, with the deployment team, I might be able to go back to this partner that's asking for some help and say, well, here's some things we could do in order to go faster, but maybe not as fast as you're looking for. So the second piece of advice is really just looking to try offering some additional solutions. And if you don't have those additional solutions, at least pointing them in the direction of where they might be able to get their questions answered could be very helpful. And the third and final piece of advice that I'd like to offer you in this situation, and it's not necessarily that it has to happen third, it's just the third one in my list, is asking more clarifying questions back to the person asking for help. If you, as the person receiving the question, can understand the challenges more clearly, you might be better situated to offer more contextual advice back to them. I know if you're overloaded and trying to answer questions for partner teams and people coming to ask you for clarification, you probably want to get this stuff out of your way because you're busy. I understand, but the reality is if you're not giving people the information they need and not supporting them, they're going to be in a worse off situation. So if you take a little bit of extra time just to understand the context, you might even be able to redirect them to somewhere else much more effectively. In that situation, not only are you getting some of your time back just by asking them a little bit more detail, but you're going to put them on a better track to get their question answered. And you can save yourself a lot of back and forth time if you're trying to avoid that, because if you understand their circumstances more clearly in the first place, the advice that you could offer is going to be way better. So this is a quick video on some tips that I have for trying to reduce limiting behavior in communication for software engineers. And if you want to see some other advice about 2 words that you can swap in your vocabulary that help a lot, check out this video next. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.